exciting because we have 4 of our coming of agers participating in the service. Coming of age is a program for our youth. It's a year long, and there are special requirements that they have to fulfill. And one of these requirements is to participate in the service. So you were greeted by Ella at the door, which surely must have made your day better, because it made my day better. And then David lit our chalice, and they will help with the offering later. And then right now we have Joella and Joey do a reading for us. It's called The Kindness of Lomain, and it's by Karen Solveig Anderson.
My friend Marcy and her boyfriend Brian recently ate dinner at a local Chinese restaurant. As they enjoyed a plate of lo mein, engrossed in conversation, a hand reached down and ushered away their platter of noodles. A voice, quick and agitated, mumbled, "Sorry," and a thin, poorly dressed woman left the restaurant with their plate of lo mein. In astonishment, they watched her walk down the street, holding the plate with the flat of her hand as she stuffed noodles into her mouth. The owner realized what had happened and darted out the front door, chasing after the noodle thief. He stood firmly in front of her, blocking her way and grabbing the side of the plate. A struggle ensued as noodles slid uneasily from one side to the other and slopped over the edge. The proprietor surged forward and pulled with a strong arm attempt to retrieve his plate. The woman's fingers slid from the plate and noodles flopped pathetically on the sidewalk. Left empty-handed with soggy, contaminated noodles at her feet, the woman stood with arms hung dejectedly at her side. The owner walked victoriously back to the restaurant with the soiled plate in hand. My friends were given a new, heaping plate of lo mein, although they had already consumed half of the stolen plate. A stream of apology came from the proprietor. Unable to eat anymore, they asked to have the noodles wrapped up and set off to see their movie.
A block later, they happened upon the lo mein thief. The woman was hypercharged. She simultaneously cried, convulsed, and shouted at a man who rapidly retreated from her side. My friend, unsure about what to do, listened to her boyfriend's plea to just walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she walked over to the thief and said, "Hey, we haven't formally met, but you seemed very interested in the noodles 10 minutes earlier. Are you still hungry?" The woman nodded and extended her bony arms. She took the styrofoam container in her hands, bowed and ever so slightly, and murmured, "Thank you, you are very kind." What makes us walk away from discomfort or stay? You could say a lot about my friend's story, a lot about generosity, kindness, attention, and thievery. I'm more interested in what motivates us to confront that which makes us uncomfortable and makes us look at the guts and grit of decisions, the choices to not address things that are uncomfortable, but uneasy, unbalanced, unnatural, unbelievable. When our foundations start to shake, we can feel the tremors move up our legs and into our torso. And we want more than anything to make it stop. And anyhow, anyway. My friend Marcy could feel herself shake. I know this because she told me so. But she chose not to walk away. She dealt with uncomfortableness. She held firm in the muck. Sometimes that's all we need or can do to get to the other side. The side where generosity, comfort, and kindness resides. The side where foundations are firm and stable, where one's shaking walks back to the other side.
So much. Thank you. I invite you into a short meditation. What I love about this story is this very fact that sometimes we have to lean into being uncomfortable to get to a place where we are our very best. So I would like you to Find a position that is comfortable. Plant your feet firmly in the ground. Close your eyes or lower your gaze and just think back in your life. When were there times where you were a little bit uncomfortable, but you were also your very best self? To the US as a very young adult in 2001, and I was so excited. I was fierce and determined and had little doubt that not only would I make it across the big pond, but I would have fun doing so. My only worry was the holidays. I figured I'd spend Christmas break at home with my family in Berlin, but I envisioned myself all alone in the dorms over Thanksgiving and Easter, left behind while all of my American friends were at home merrymaking with their families. Now, there was no need to worry at all. I arrived in late August and had my Thanksgiving plans lined up by late September. One of the young women on my floor invited me to spend the holidays with her and her family in the north suburbs of Chicago, with 7 people around the table. Her parents, my friend and her 2 sisters, myself, and the first grandchild. The mom went all out. There was a giant turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, candied yams, green bean casserole, stuffings, rolls, gravy, cranberry sauce, probably several side dishes that have slipped my memory, and 2 pies, different kinds. The next morning, they woke me up at 4:30 a.m. so that we'd be able to start waiting in line outside of the Best Buy at 5:30. On the way there, the whole family sang, "I am proud to be an American," in the car to wake themselves up. It was the whole American shebang, and it was glorious. Since then, I spent Thanksgiving with several different families in several different places. Once even on an army base surrounded by Navy pilots. I had every imaginable side dish. You can quiz me after the service if you want to. And I even made my own Thanksgiving meal a couple of times. I love the food. I love the tradition of expressing gratitude. I do not love the history behind the holiday, but I do love the hospitality. And you might think that the hospitality, the welcoming, you might take that for granted, but I'm here to tell you that this is a very American cultural trait. In many European countries, holidays are for the family, and the family only. Growing up in Germany, I can think of exactly 2 times we had non-family members celebrating Christmas with us. And in either case, it was an American exchange students that either I or my sister became friends with after we had been in the US as young adults. My parents invited them to pay forward their gratitude that neither of their young adult children never had to spend a holiday alone once they left the nest and the continent. Hospitality, sharing, making room at the table, and welcoming the newcomer so that new relationships can be formed are deeply ingrained in American culture. Orphan Thanksgivings are a common thing, and here at church we have our own Thanksgiving every year, and from what I've heard, it's pretty awesome. And yet, as much as I would just like to say that all my amazing Thanksgiving invitations were all just because you're just that awesome, or your culture is just that awesome, or I am just that awesome. It's all of that, but also something else. It's also because I had and have a whole bunch of privilege that makes me more likely to be the international student, the immigrant, the foreigner who gets invited to family dinner. Think back of those years that I spent in rural Illinois. Yes, I was a foreigner and I spoke with an accent much stronger than now, if you can imagine. But I was also white. My nationality was German, which is a big selling point in the Midwest. I had class privilege. I wasn't out as queer then, not even to myself, so I had straight privilege. All of that made it so much more likely for me to be invited and welcomed at a Thanksgiving dinner. The experience of many Arab international students during November of 2001 was a very, very different one. I had several gay and lesbian friends who had neither their own nor their partner's home to have Thanksgiving at unless they would hide who they really were. And I know for a fact that most of the Chinese students I now teach at UCI have not had the chance yet to spend Thanksgiving at an American household. Now, so many people cringe when the word privilege is brought up. Some see it as an insult. Don't you call me privileged? To others, it sounds like an assigning of blame or shame, or is a way of silencing them. The phrase, check your privilege, is often uttered as a conversation stopper, rather than an invitation to deepen the discussion. Bringing up privilege can sound like someone is disregarding the work you had to put into your accomplishments, implying that you did not earn the things you have or the position you hold. And sometimes bringing up privilege can sound to people not just like saying your voice doesn't matter, but also like saying your pain doesn't matter. You're white or male or whatever other privilege, so I don't care about your pain. Let's take a breath here. And if any of this sounded familiar to you, then take another deep cleansing breath right now. Do it with me. Because I'm going to keep talking about privilege, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable. As we just learned from our youth, sometimes we need to get outside of our comfort zone to be in touch with our best selves. But I'm not saying that anyone's voice or accomplishment or pain doesn't matter, regardless how much or little privilege you have. All of you matter. In an article, I read a definition of privilege that really resonated with me. The author, Brianna Payton, says that privilege is not an idea aimed at muting opinions or understating the worth of accomplishments. It is not a stab at personal character, nor is it something for which anyone needs to apologize. But it is also not a myth. Privilege refers to the very real benefits that society affords certain groups over others, and it is manifested in many ways. And having these benefits doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that certain parts of your identity, being white, being straight, being male, give you the benefit of not making your life harder. Or in other words, if you have privilege in a certain area, you're treated fairly. If you have straight privilege, you don't have to worry about bakers refusing to bake a cake for your wedding. If you have economic privilege, you don't have to decide what's more important, paying the electricity bill or buying Christmas presents for your children. If you have male privilege, your gender does not mean you're systematically paid less, and it also means you have to worry far less about sexual violence. And if you have white privilege, you don't have to explain to your kids why some suspect them of possible thievery or other crimes simply because of the melanin levels in their skin. Clearly, not being treated unfairly does not make you a bad person. And also, yes, even if you have all the privilege in the world, you were not the person who single-handedly created a system where others have to endure injustice simply because of who they are. There's a spoken word poem. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. It's called White Boy's Privilege, and it recently jumped up on my Facebook page. It's by Royce Mann, and he's like an 8th grade white boy. And I considered playing it for you, but I decided against it because he's using some really strong language, and I figured it's Sunday morning at church. However, he's using that language for a really good reason, and I highly encourage you to just Google him and watch it this afternoon, or on Monday, if that makes you feel better. One of the things he says is, I know it wasn't us 8th grade white boys who created this system, but we profit from it every day. We don't notice these privileges, though, because they don't come in the form of things we gain, but rather the lack of injustice that we endure. Privilege is the lack of injustices that we endure. Privilege means that you're treated fairly, and you should be. You should not have to worry that any part of your identity, of who you are, counts against you or makes your life harder. None of us should. That's why when we gather around the Thanksgiving table, we don't usually give thanks for this kind of privilege. We don't say, I am grateful that I got a promotion I deserved and the same wages as my colleagues despite my gender. We don't say, I am grateful that my father, who's done his best to raise me and support his family for as long as I can remember, does not live in fear of being deported. We don't say, I'm grateful that when I'm in public, I can use the restroom without running danger of either being arrested or facing violence. And we also don't say, I'm grateful that when my partner is driving a car with a broken taillight, he most likely won't get shot during a traffic spot. We don't say these things. We don't express gratitudes for these things because we want to assume that we live in a country where we can take these things for granted. And acknowledging that we do not is something that makes us feel uncomfortable. But the fact of the matter is that some of us cannot take these things for granted. And if we don't see that, if we do not see the privilege we have and we do not acknowledge that others do not have the same privilege, we run danger of doing them harm. Because if we don't see injustice, we'll perpetuate it. This is one of the truest and most tragic facts of human history. If we don't see injustice, we will perpetuate it. And it is really hard to see it, because that's one of the more insidious truths about privilege. To those who have it, it's mainly invisible. We don't often see the intersectionality of our different identities, gender, race, sexual orientation, and so on and so forth. We don't see how these can add privilege to our life unless we make a conscious effort to look for it. We only see it when we don't have it. So let's make it visible. Let's make privilege and intersectionality visible for a second. Could I have our next slide? Thank you. Let's go back to our Thanksgiving plate. So imagine in your head or on your hands, imagine you have an empty plate in front of you and you're standing in front of the buffet and you're like ready to pile food on your plate, right? You're very hungry. Let's say white privilege is the turkey. So if you're white, you get to put turkey on your plate, right? And usually we say that, take that for granted because it's Thanksgiving after all, right? If you're male, you also get mashed potatoes. Go ahead, keep them on. If you're straight, you get green beans. And if you're cisgender, if the sex you were assigned at birth still matches your gender identity, you also get corn, like good corn, yummy corn, you know. And good beans, just clarifying. If you have American citizenship, you get yummy homemade cranberry sauce with cinnamon and orange zest and all that. And if you aren't a citizen, but you have a green card or a long-term visa, then you get the can-shaped jelly stuff that most people forget to put on the table during the actual dinner. Economic privilege, take some candied yams. If you're neurotypical and able-bodied, you get stuffing, and the list goes on. So take a moment and look at your imaginary Thanksgiving plate. What's on there? How full is your plate? What's missing? For some of us, the ways that our different identities intersect means that our plate is still pretty full. For others in the world, in this country, or this room, our plate is getting emptier and emptier. And this is what is meant by the term intersectionality. It is the way that our different identities create accumulated privilege or the lack thereof. Now, often when we lack privilege in a certain area, when we don't get the mashed potatoes or we don't get the stuffing, when we're not treated fairly in that area, that is all we can focus on. The other things we take for granted so much that it often doesn't register that we have them and others do not. If I'm missing out on the mashed potatoes and someone says, "Oh, Rica, but look at those lovely green beans," that might not help me, right? And if someone does not have any turkey and I say, "Oh yes, I know exactly what that's like because I don't have mashed potatoes," that might not help them. And it's also not true because turkey and mashed potatoes are not the same thing. Just that racism and sexism are not the same thing. But both can leave us with a sense of deep felt unfairness, with a sense of pain and fear. And even when we have a full plate in front of us, even if you literally have all of that privilege right there on the plate in front of you, you probably still know what it's like to feel pain and fear and loss. If not on a structural, then on a personal level. because privilege cannot protect us from that. It is this pain and fear that often makes us overly protective of the privilege or food groups we do have. Instead of sharing our plate or our privilege, we guard it. We look at all the unfairness in the world, and instead of working towards making sure that there is enough fairness for everyone, we try to guard what we have to protect ourselves and our loved ones, and just close our eyes to the injustice that others experience. But that is not what Thanksgiving is all about. Thanksgiving is not about guarding our plates, but about sharing. About making sure that everyone has enough. It's about calling each other in, inviting each other to the table, everyone. It's about breaking bread and carving turkey and being in relationship and sharing stories of joy and of pain and of loss and of fear so we can join in each other's happiness and we can ease each other's burdens. The Thanksgiving table is a horizontal space where we can all level with each other, rather than a ladder that only allows a few of us to advance. And in sharing that meal and creating community, we can start talking about not just how we can use our privilege for good, but how we can dismantle it. Not to lose it, but make sure that everyone has it, that everyone is treated fairly, and that no one's identity is counting against them. At the Thanksgiving table, there is always, always, always more than enough. And don't worry about what happens when the feast is over and the abundance runs out. It is the relationships that we build when we break bread and the community that we make our home that will sustain us. May it be so.